Have you ever wondered why the quietest room can humble the loudest man? In the drama of human relationships, there is a woman who does not clap back, does not plead her case, does not audition for acceptance. She closes the theater curtains and lets the noise exhaust itself. Her silence is not absence. It is a presence so complete that provocation withers in front of it. She stands like an ancient column, unshaken by wind or rumor, and something within the aggressor collapses, his own echo, suddenly unamplified. This is where Stoic mastery begins, not in icy detachment, but in sovereign regulation of response. The old philosophers understood what modern psychology now confirms. Regulation is power, and power kept within does not need performance. Observe her as archetype more than individual. The queen who no longer bargains with chaos, the huntress who wastes no arrow on shadows. Those who try to bait her are performing their unfinished childhood, projection, displacement, the restless theater of the ego. A tongue sharpened by insecurity hopes to slice through dignity, yet when the blade meets silence, it finds no resistance to bite, only air, and the wielder sees himself. That is Jung's mirror. Without the fuel of your reaction, their shadow stands alone under the light. You know this feeling, the impulse to defend, to correct the narrative, to prove worth. But what if the proof was already complete? What if the truth did not require your breath? She answers by not answering. Epictetus would name it, control what belongs to you, release what does not. Words aim to conquer you belong to another. The reaction belongs to you. She protects that inner citadel as if it were sacred architecture. Silence becomes the gatekeeper, not a retreat, but a boundary. The declaration, here chaos ends. When accusation thunders, she lets it pass like weather. In neuroscience, you can almost see it. Stress arousal rising, then being contained as a regulated wave, not a flood. She breathes, and the amygdala learns it is safe to stand down. The system resets. Power returns to the driver. You might think silence is weakness, a failure to defend the self. Yet in practice, it is the reverse, the refusal to outsource dignity to the courtroom of public opinion. The crowd demands a spectacle. The ego craves verdicts. She declines both. Seneca wrote that anger chains the mind. Silence breaks the chain by declining the link. Each unissued reply is a forged link falling away. Do you feel it inside your chest? The space that opens when you do not explain yourself? To those committed to misunderstanding, that space is sovereignty. That space is the ground where individuation begins. There is a moment after betrayal when the body seeks noise, texts, witnesses, evidence. She chooses stillness, not to deny pain, but to honor it privately. The wound becomes a teeth. The fantasies of recognition, the terror of abandonment. She sits with them like a monk sitting with storms. No counterattack, no chase. Slowly, the stories of unworthiness loosen. Self-respect grows its own spine. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. Inside, a civilization is being rebuilt. When gossip tries to legislate her identity, she lets the tribunal talk to itself. Silence here is not passivity. It is strategic containment. A story starves without attention. Projection needs a host. Without her rebuttal, the tale must eat the teller. And it does. Watch how the rumor turns back on the one who launched it. Watch how the community, deprived of spectacle, begins to notice the desperation behind the script. Marcus Aurelius observed that the best answer to insult is to be what the insulter is not. Silence is that answer in its most distilled form, behavior that refuses the role that would complete the drama. You too have felt the pull to correct every distortion, but notice what it costs: time, sleep, a shredded nervous system, a self diffused into 10,000 arguments. When you withdraw your voice from that economy, You bankrupt the marketplace of disrespect. The price of your attention goes up. Access to your presence becomes earned, not assumed. This is not cruelty, it is hygiene. It is the boundary that allows love to flourish where reciprocity exists and causes weeds to wither where it does not. In love, the quiet is a test and a balm. When manipulation seeks to yank the strings, hot and cold, withholding to fish for panic, she doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't audition for crumbs. She becomes the ocean that refuses to rise for a pebble. In that vastness, the game becomes visible for what it is, an old childhood wound replaying itself. The anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine, whisper the same instruction. Return to center. When she does, the game collapses because it cannot survive without her reactivity. In place of performance, she chooses observation. In place of pleading, she chooses standards. Silence is not forever. It is a chrysalis. From it, the voice that emerges is clean, concise, and rare. When spoken, it lands. When withheld, it sanctifies. The world learns to read her pauses as sentences, and those who once feasted on her reactivity learn hunger. The strongest revenge was never punishment. It was transformation rendered undeniable. Silence becomes a crucible when disrespect arrives wearing velvet gloves. The archetype sees it, a teasing jab masked as humor, a subtle correction delivered with performative. You recognize the temptation to strike back, to craft the perfect line. Yet the perfect line is often no line at all, only the calm that reveals how desperately the other needed a reaction to legitimize the script. There is a second field where quiet conquers, the realm of gaslighting. When reality is bent and words are twisted, the ego longs to produce exhibits and footnotes. She declines the courtroom. Instead, she returns to the body's data: breath, shoulders, belly, pulse. Physiology becomes oracle. The mind trying to debate a liar is quicksand. The nervous system standing still is rock. Epictetus taught mastery of impressions, not of other minds. She treats each distorted claim as a passing cloud and anchors to what does not drift: observed sensations, clear memories stored without theater. The manipulator loses fuel. With no frantic dispute, there is nothing to spin. You can sense the relief of not arguing with bad faith, the release of handing confusion back to its maker. The third place is the aftermath of humiliation. When dignity has been mocked and the chorus expects flustered defense, her quiet is not a retreat, but a reset of moral weather. She tends to the interior: sleep, movement, wise counsel, while the external storm seeks headlines. In Jungian terms, the shadow of shame knocks at the gate, demanding exile or pity. She offers neither. She acknowledges it without worship. This dignified non-drama dissolves the humiliator's triumph. Victory depends on spectacle, and she gives none. You too can make that choice: repair before rebuttal, coherence before commentary. Then, when speech returns, it does so with weight rather than scatter. Consider ambition. Success can attract gnats of envy masquerading as critique. They assemble in swarms, tasting any open wound. She does not swat at each one. Silence here is a strategic altitude. Marcus Aurelius would approve. Stay with what the work requires. Results become the response. The book finished, the body strengthened, the enterprise steady. The swarm tires. There is nothing edible. When you withhold the feast of explanation, you invite critics to examine themselves. Why the obsession with her steps? Why the devotion to her perceived faults? Envy withers without an audience, and if it persists, it indicts itself. Negotiation offers a fifth theater. Silence is a lever that moves the terms. When pressured to accept less than fairness, the archetype lets the offer echo unanswered. Time works like a slow tide, exposing the rocks of true intention. The other party begins to speak more than is wise. The need to fill the quiet betrays hidden floors and ceilings. He learns more by saying less. You may try it. State your boundary, then let it breathe. Absence of eagerness is leverage. Respect rises to meet what does not beg. The sixth is when love weaponizes panic. A partner threatens to leave to provoke a chase, disappears. In that non-pursuit, the anxious interlock breaks. Attachment patterns reveal themselves, pursuer-distancer, protest-withdrawal, the childhood melody that keeps adults dancing. Her silence interrupts the music. She chooses secure rhythm, clear standards, spoken once, then honored through distance if trampled. This is not coldness, it is warmth protected. You can feel the difference. Silence that punishes versus silence that preserves self-respect. The latter restores relational gravity. Either the other steps into maturity, or the space remains blessedly quiet. Finally, there is healing itself. Trauma often trains a tongue to explain, convince, perform safety. She untrains it. In private rituals, journaling without sending, praying without broadcasting, training without declaration, she rebuilds musculature unseen by crowds. The psyche does not heal under applause. It heals under consistent, untelevised care. Jung called it individuation, withdrawing projections, owning the inner cast. Silence gathers the actors and rewrites the play. The heroine no longer seeks rescuers or villains to complete her arc. She becomes author and guardian of the stage. And paradoxically, from that quiet authorship emerges a voice so centered that when it speaks, it needs no exclamation point. Notice how each setting returns to the same axiom: control of response is control of reality. The world tries to draft her into dramas where shouting is demanded. She refuses the draft. The refusal is not complacency, it is selection. Where her speech will bear fruit, she speaks with precision. Where it would only fertilize weeds, she gives nothing. You can sense the elegance of this economy. Fewer words, more consequence. Fewer battles, more victories that matter. The ego seeks to be seen winning. The soul seeks to be free of contests unworthy of its light. Silence, held correctly, becomes the finest instrument of discernment. The archetype understands that quiet is not merely the absence of speech, but the presence of self-command. In the workplace where politics disguises itself as collaboration, she practices the art of undefended listening. Colleagues test boundaries with soft sabotage or strategic compliments that feel like velvet-gloved handcuffs. She notices cadence, timing, micro-pauses. She observes what is volunteered too quickly and what is hidden too long. Without offering her plans, she watches how others behave when they cannot map her interior. The persona of the room grows anxious because it cannot predict her. That anxiety reveals loyalties more reliably than any question. You might feel urged to disclose for warmth or rush to fill the gaps. Resist, let the gaps work. Let others show their architecture while yours remains grounded. Silence is also a crucible for family myths. Many inherit scripts: the peacemaker who smooths chaos, the achiever who overperforms to be held, the child who becomes the parent's therapist. In those rooms, speech often became a survival craft, a way to steer storms. The archetype chooses a different craft: stillness. She does not defend adulthood to those invested in her younger mask. She refuses bait that begins with, "You always," or "You never." The old ritual expects escalation. She offers the clean break of no rehearsal. It feels radical because fawning once felt like love. Yet as she holds the quiet, the nervous system learns that safety need not be negotiated every minute. You too can permit a sentence to end without an essay appended to it. The body will protest at first, a vibration of old alarms. Breathe until the alarm realizes nothing is burning. In love's corridors, silence sets the rhythm of reciprocity. The archetype does not announce standards as a performance. She embodies them. When a message arrives flavored with contempt, no reply is crafted with trembling hands at midnight. The phone becomes a stone on a table. Morning light does the sorting. This is not icy withdrawal. It is the refusal to teach someone how to diminish you. The anima within her, The receptive depth wants to open. The animus, the sovereign function, guards the threshold. Together they produce a poised doorway through which only reverence walks. Your impulses will sometimes masquerade as urgency. Send, explain, soothe, fix. Observe the impulse like a bird at the window. If it is frantic, do not let it in. Frantic help is often a form of self-abandonment. Silence also exposes projection. Jung knew that what is disowned in the psyche is hurled outward to be battled in others. When she ceases to argue, the projection loses a stage. Those who need her to be the villain must recruit someone else. Those who need her to be the savior must learn their own knees. This withdrawal of performance is a sacred drought. Fields dependent on her rainfall must grow their own wells or remain barren. The ego will call it cruelty. The soul calls it truth. You may feel guilt rise like fog. Remember that guilt often belongs to a younger self who believed love required endless explanation. Offer that self-respect, not another trial. From a Stoic lens, silence refines the triad: perception, action, will. Perception is trained by quiet, seeing things as they are without the distortions of offended pride. Action becomes deliberate instead of impulsive. Fewer swings, clean strikes. Will becomes the steady heat that powers endurance without complaint. The ancient emperors wrote privately to steady themselves. Modern psychology calls it self-regulation, cognitive reappraisal, somatic anchoring. The names change, the mechanism is constant. She pairs silence with rhythm. The archetype rejects that counterfeit. Her quiet is connected, not numb, principled, not punitive. She maintains bonds where mutuality lives. She withdraws where exploitation feeds. One can tell by the fruit. Avoidance breeds stagnation and bitterness. Principled quiet breeds clarity and momentum. Ask, before choosing silence, will this create space for character to reveal itself in them and in you? If yes, it is medicine. If no, it is armor that will become a prison. When she finally speaks, the effect is surgical. Words carry the charge of stored intention. A boundary stated once cleanly replaces 100 lectures. A simple no ends what drama wanted to turn into a trilogy. The room registers the difference between scarcity, muteness, and sovereign restraint. You can cultivate that force by pruning every performative syllable. Remove the apology that smuggles itself into the boundary. Remove the disclaimer that seeks indulgence. Let the sentence stand as a pillar you would live under. If the pillar tilts, rework the foundation, not the paint. Social arenas crave reaction. Outrage economies and algorithms feed on heat. She starves them. No subtweet, no cryptic post, no breadcrumb trail for amateur detectives. The absence draws a silence around her that feels like cathedral air, charged, reverent, echoing only with what is worthy of saying. Critics weary of shouting into a chamber that does not answer back. Admirers learn that access to her takes more than attention, it takes alignment. This is the rarest revenge, not public defeat of an enemy, but private mastery over the need for an enemy at all. There will be moments where breaking silence is the courageous act, defending the helpless, naming abuse, drawing legal lines. The archetype knows the difference because she has practiced honesty in the quiet hours. She speaks when speech serves truth, not ego. She is not a statue. She is a mountain with weather. From that altitude, every storm looks smaller than the stone. Silence hones timing until it feels like fate rather than strategy. The archetype understands that most harm happens in the rush. Words thrown to outrun fear, promises offered to sedate anxiety, confessions poured into hands that cannot carry them. She slows the inner metronome. In that slower rhythm, she reads motives the way sailors read currents, not by surface glitter, but by pull. Those who approach with urgency but without substance reveal a hunger for control. Those who approach with patience reveal capacity. She answers in kind. Where desperation reaches, she refrains. Where steadiness waits, she meets. She blocks numbers without announcing it, releases roles without memorial services, hands history back to history. Psychologically, it is a reparenting act. The inner child that once demanded a witness to pain receives instead a witness within, stable attention, honest naming, simple care. When the nervous system experiences this reliability, external provocation loses jurisdiction. The body no longer begs the world to regulate it. This is the secret strength seen in her posture. Shoulders neither rigid nor collapsed, face neither masked nor pleading. She is not hiding, she is inhabiting. In the crucible of creative life, silence becomes a womb. Work demanded to be explained dies early. Work nurtured in privacy is born with lungs. She does not post seedlings for applause, she waters them off stage. The algorithm's appetite for constant words cannot digest her tempo. Paradoxically, the scarcity of her updates turns attention into respect. You may recognize the itch to announce, to promise a future achievement so the present feels safer. Resist. Let labor be its own weather system. When the piece is ready, it will arrive carrying its own thunder. Until then, the quiet allows the psyche to concentrate, to metabolize influences without becoming a collage of others' voices. The archetype's silence also disciplines memory. There is the story of what happened, and then there is the ritual of retelling it until it grows teeth it never had. She limits retellings. Each repetition engraves grooves in the nervous system. Each retelling recruits witnesses who add their paint. Restraint preserves truth from distortion. Stoic practice meets trauma science here. Cognitive reappraisal is served by fewer sensational rehearsals. Somatic release is served by stillness more than speeches. When the tale must be told, to a therapist, a court, a trusted elder, it is told once with clarity and then allowed to rest. Revenge loses oxygen when the story is not paraded. Justice, if needed, remains possible because the facts are clean. There is a social rite of performance disguised as intimacy, the compulsory self-disclosure that purchases belonging. She does not buy. Privacy is not secrecy, it is sovereignty. A boundary that says, "Not for this room," communicates self-respect more powerfully than 1,000 curated confessions. Jung would call it protection of the self from intrusion by the persona's market. She knows the difference between connection and consumption. Connection nourishes and deepens, consumption extracts and discards. You are invited to ask, before speaking, is this a gift or a hemorrhage? Will this feed the bond or feed the gossip? Silence will often answer before words can. In confrontation, silence calibrates proportion. Insults do not deserve essays. Violations deserve consequences. She refuses to escalate petty slights into tribunals. Steal to harm creates a reputation more persuasive than rhetoric. People learn the contours of her world. Teasing will be ignored. Disrespect will be costed. Abuse will be named and exited with the crispness of a signed document. This clarity is the most disorienting revenge to those who crave chaos, because chaos expects either a fight or a plea. It receives neither. It receives policy. Romance sometimes mistakes silence for mystery to be conquered. Suitors project fantasies onto what is withheld. The rescuer imagines a damsel. The narcissist imagines a fan. The cynic imagines a game. Her quiet is none of these. It is the open sky in which a true partner reveals himself by how he shares his own sky. Steady, honest, unafraid of weather. The inner masculine within her, decisive, structured, anchors her choices. The inner feminine, intuitive, receptive, senses the music behind words. Together, they make her untrickable. When admiration tests for boundaries, she answers by keeping them. When affection attempts to negotiate away self-respect, she negotiates with absence instead. The lesson is learned, or the connection ends. Either outcome is clean. Silence teaches the ego about size. Without applause or argument, the ego shrinks to fit its rightful function. Servant, not sovereign. Then, the soul, long overshadowed, extends. In this extension, forgiveness becomes possible. Not the sentimental variety that forgets facts, but the sober kind that sets down the urge to even the score. Forgiveness here is architectural. It frees the mind from building rooms for enemies. The freed mind returns to craft, to friendship, to the long labor of becoming. This is how her presence grows paradoxically louder, not through decibels, but through coherence. People trust structures that do not rattle in wind. Digital realms amplify noise, and she answers with deliberate absence. No thread hopping, no late-night clarifications, no GIF wars. The persona craves the last word. The self prefers the last result. She lets metrics trail behind meaning. Disciples of immediacy will misread this as aloofness. Those who understand tempo will see it as mastery. You may experiment 24 sacred hours before responding to bait, 12 sacred hours before posting wounded pride, 3 sacred breaths before any reply at all. Watch how many fires extinguish themselves when denied oxygen. Watch how many potential wars dissolve into ordinary weather when not named as battles. The rare times she breaks the quiet, the room feels the click of rightness. A boundary articulated in one breath, a truth named without. The archetype carries this geometry into rooms where truth is contested and artifice wears medals. She sits with the calm of a magistrate who knows that real verdicts occur in the marrow long before they are drafted on paper. When accusation arrives wrapped in eloquence, she lets eloquence dissipate like perfume in a storm. The body, trained by quiet, does not mistake aroma for nutrition. She does not posture, does not catalog grievances to impress the gallery. She allows fact to keep its unadorned shape. In that discipline, appearances grow brittle. The theater loses its lighting when the audience refuses intoxication. Her quiet is not merely a strategy. It is a sanctuary with doors open to rigor. In that sanctuary, the daily rituals accumulate, dawn pages that are not posted, strength trained without selfies, prayer that asks for nothing and receives composure, a walk that resets the inner horizon. These small obediences teach the psyche the difference between hunger and calling. Jung called the protected space of work a temenos, a sacred precinct where the self can emerge unharassed by the persona's costumes. She guards this precinct like a queen who knows empires are lost not to enemies, but to neglected kitchens and unwatered gardens. You can feel the nourishment of such hidden order, a life untelevised that keeps its pulse steady when public weather turns strange. Silence also refines aesthetic judgment. an ethics of taste that is really an ethics of soul. She declines the overstimulated banquet and chooses one dish cooked with care. In relationships, this looks like fewer connections, deeper loyalties. In information, fewer sources, more study. In emotions, fewer outbursts, more exact language. The mind, watered by stillness, begins to prefer accuracy to drama. Marcus would name it, the task of the rational soul is to conform itself to reality. Conformity here is not submission, but alignment, like a blade set true against a whetstone. Words that once flew recklessly now travel as deliberate couriers. The audience recognizes the difference without needing a syllabus. Restraint produces resonance. There is a place where silence seems most intolerable, the hour of apology. Many apologies are really negotiations for comfort, declarations that demand immediate absolution. The archetype listens, not to reward performance, but to weigh repentance. She does not fill the air with assurances, does not rush to rescue the offender from the weight of his own consequences. Silence offers him the dignity to meet himself. If the loss dissolves grammar, arguments fracture under the magnitude of absence. She does not try to make sense before sorrow has finished its season. She chooses the older wisdom. Sit with the broken cup before reaching for glue. The psyche moves through alchemical phases here, the negredo of darkness, where meaning is ash, then the slow albedo, where breath returns clean, and finally the rubedo, where a deeper vitality arrives, quieter and truer than the youth who never suffered. She refuses the culture's coercion to bounce back. She returns instead, transfigured, measured, tender without becoming fragile. This is a revenge against despair, not denial, but a rebirth beyond spectacle. Public attacks sometimes demand a statement. Her silence learns the difference between protecting dignity and enabling harm. Where law and safety require, she speaks with precision, names names, cites dates, draws lines. Where ego merely wants to indulge in public theater, she lets the stage go dark. This discernment saves her from two traps: the righteousness that feeds on performance and the passivity that cloaks fear as virtue. She is neither a megaphone nor a ghost. She is a bell, sounded only when meaning calls, and when sounded, unmistakable. The community learns to trust this bell because it does not ring for vanity. Economies of attention crave infinite availability. Her quiet restores scarcity. Scarcity here is not manipulation, but ecology. Rare things become valuable because they are stewarded, not hoarded. She replies when there is something to advance, not when there is a void to fill. The result is paradoxical abundance. Fewer conversations, more impact. Fewer posts, more presence. Fewer lovers, more love. You may sense the irritation her economy provokes in those addicted to immediate access. Their frustration is the tuition they pay to learn her terms. Those who adapt become capable companions. Those who refuse drift toward rooms that prefer noise. Silence also repairs the contract with the body. Trauma taught the nervous system to sprint at every alarm. Quiet teaches it to verify the fire before fleeing. Breath becomes governor, posture becomes policy. She notices the angle of her neck when shame approaches, the clench of her jaw when envy knocks, the slump that signals self-betrayal. She answers with micro-corrections, shoulders back, exhale slow, feet rooted. The psyche takes note. Dignity becomes embodied, not just declared. From this embodied stance, decisions change, contracts declined, doors closed, invitations accepted. Each a sentence in the autobiography of someone who has. She names strengths and defects with the kind of still voice that makes denial impossible. The gift is not comfort, but clarity. Clarity is love that intends adulthood. Eventually, silence resolves into one enduring posture, detachment without indifference. She cares deeply, she holds lightly. Outcomes are pursued with excellence, then surrendered to reality's arbiters. If triumph arrives, she does not shout, because victory is not a weapon against anyone. It is a covenant with her own standard. If loss arrives, she does not crumble, because identity was never collateralized to outcomes. This equanimity is the final shape of revenge. Life lived so well that the old dramas cannot afford the ticket. Silence practiced long enough becomes a climate of inner weather, a sky that does not panic when storms arrive. In that sky, old entanglements lose their gravity. The archetype wakes into a morning where the nervous system no longer chews its own sleeve for proof of belonging. The mirror does not interrogate, it receives. There is work to do, and she does it with hands that no longer tremble for permission. What once demanded announcements now breathes as ritual, the bed made like a promise kept, the water sipped like a vow to the living body, the calendar cleaned of obligations that used to flatter emptiness. Quiet reorders value. Attention stops auctioning itself to the lowest bidder and returns like land reclaimed to the steward who will cultivate it. She employs her silence as a gardener employs seasons, sowing in winter's hush, tending in spring's patience, harvesting in summer's joy, composting in autumn's letting go. Results are a byproduct, not the altar. Enemies dissolve because the ecosystem of reactivity that fed them has grown infertile. You can feel this shift like a window opened after years of stale air. The psyche inhales and remembers its original size. Detachment emerges not as a trick, but as a temperament. The old reflex to argue, to seduce, to soothe the unsoothable fades like a song played too many times. She becomes particular without becoming hard, soft without being porous. Standards are spoken once and then enforced by the music of her life, not the volume of her lectures. Those who need spectacle drift toward stages built for performers. Those who want presence find a seat at her quiet table and discover that conversation tastes different when neither party is starving. The shadow once feared as a dungeon is approached as a library. She scans its stacks without shame, reading titles she used to hide. Jealousy. You are invited to make the same exchange. A self no longer legislated by what it cannot bear to see becomes a self that bears witness and therefore bears fruit. In that bearing, love changes form. Approval loses its currency. Respect becomes legal tender. She no longer recruits caretakers for a child that has now been rightfully parented inside. Partners cease to be auditions for safety and become companions for a journey already chosen. Silence here is not a wall, but a courtyard, open, sunlit, protected from thieves. From within this courtyard, she speaks with an ease that startles those who knew her in the era of proving. Ease is not the absence of standard. It is the absence of fear that the standard will leave her alone. The Stoic triad, perception, action, will, settles into elegance. Perception cleans the lens. Events no longer arrive pre-labeled as catastrophe or crown. They are simply events, waiting to be used well. Action prunes waste, fewer tasks undertaken, but each with full presence. Will ceases to be strain and becomes steadiness, a flame that does not flare to impress, nor dim to avoid attention. This is what Marcus meant by living in agreement with nature, intention in harmony with reality, dignity with room to breathe. Freedom from external validation is felt most clearly in the spaces that used to be most haunted. The phone lights up with bait. It is allowed to glow and go dark, like lightning that has learned it does not own the sky. A message arrives with contempt. It receives no rent from her focus. An invitation whispers flattery. The calendar listens for alignment, not adrenaline. She remembers that presence is finite and sacred. She spends it where there is reciprocity, craft, and clean joy. She withholds it where there is extraction, chaos, and endless apologies borrowed against an unchanged future. Rebirth does not come with trumpets. It arrives like a house whose bones are quietly repaired until one day the rooms echo with music, and no one can remember the last time the roof leaked. She laughs more, not because the world softened, but because the interior ceased griping for what was never owed. She forgives more, not as absolution for harm, but as a refusal to chain her attention to the past. She is less available to gossip, more available to gratitude. The body, consulted faithfully, answers with clarity. This person nourishes, that project hollows. This choice keeps the soul awake. There is a last offering that silence makes, mercy toward the self that stumbled. Meta, pause, sex, 0.05. That is growth's price. But inside, the verdict has been rendered and rendered clean, worthy without witness, whole without the chorus. Imagine the old provocations arriving to find the house empty of echoes. What once ricocheted now falls soft. What once found tinder now finds stone wet with blessed rain. Peace is not the absence of battle. It is the refusal to wage war against oneself. From this refusal, strength blooms fresh as morning.